All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our actual first episode of Beer and Bastards. You don't want to watch the premiere. That was really a dry run, and Matt Palumbo ruined it because he was on a date. But I just want to introduce everybody, or we could start off with some introductions. I'm Will Riccadella. I'm the administrator at The Analytical Conservative, which is probably, it is the best page on Facebook for conservative and libertarian principles. Also, Mike Lee, talk about the page that you run, and what's its main premise.
My page is Being Liberal Logic. I've also started admitting at Being Classically Liberal. But the main premise for Being Liberal Logic is just basically calling out the faulty logic that liberals use, and Being Liberal happens to be the page that runs the most liberal memes and most of the liberal logic. So we just call out the faulty logic they use and that they don't use data, and we make sure that we source everything, unlike liberals usually do when they're talking on the internet, and that's the main premise of our page.
So are you saying that liberals don't use reason, logic, or facts?
Not usually, at least on the internet.
Okay, because I think repetition is a good substitute for all three of those things, don't you? If you repeat it enough, or just make baseless claims like racist, that could work too.
Well, that's definitely what they do, or they tell you that you're not compassionate because you don't want to take other people's money and give it to the poor, how liberals think it should be distributed. So I'm not very compassionate.
Because only government helps the poor. Only government helps the poor, Mike, okay? Read a book.
Precisely.
All right, now, Matt Palumbo, talk about the pages you run and how many books you've written, and and what books you've written. I understand you're a very accomplished author, and you also look like you work out.
And I'm also a womanizer, according to you, apparently. So.
Oh yeah, that's true. Duh, author and you work out.
I run the Being Classically Liberal page. Corey brought me on a year and a half ago. And I actually run Being Liberal Logic with Mike as well. Two books I wrote. One is called The Conscience of a Young Conservative, which I wrote in 2013. And the other one I wrote with Corey from BCL, and it's called In Defense of Classical Liberalism.
Okay, very interesting. And you admin at BCL and Being Liberal Logic?
Yes.
Okay. And now we have as a special guest today, our handsome, very handsome special guest, Chris Calton, who hasn't had a haircut in 3 years, and he's drinking a sugar-free drink, which is fairly appropriate. He's started some pages on Facebook, and he's kind of well known for being a gigantic jerk. Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Don't tell me what to do, Will.
That's exact. There's Chris Calton. That sums you up in one line. Chris is our resident anarchist, so anything that we talk about that actually applies to things, Chris will give us the anarchist answer, which doesn't apply to anything. All right, so now that we've done our introductions, there's a lot in the news right now, certainly on Facebook, that people are talking about some issues that are overly hyperbolic that really shouldn't be, and one of them is American Sniper. And being that Michael Lee gets the most traffic to his page, I mean, even more so than Being Classically Liberal right now. I don't know why, but talk about what you hear and what are the major problems that people have with American Sniper. Is this a libertarian anti-American thing, like a radical libertarian anti-American thing? Is this an establishment, GOP establishment thing, and they're kind of using this as a lightning rod? What do you think?
To be honest, I don't know what the problem with American Sniper is. I think most of the people that have made a problem of it has been the left and the liberals. They act like this is the first war movie that's ever come out. There was a couple years ago where there was a movie about Navy SEALs. I can't remember what the name of it. I think it was Act of Valor. That was definitely more rah-rah patriotism than this movie is. This movie shows really, the down parts of war, the parts of war that people don't usually want to see, that we don't want to hear about. So I'm not really sure why liberals have made this into this thing where, it's rah-rah, it's revisionist history, it's cheering at the war on terrorism, the war in Iraq. I don't really understand what their problem with the movie is. I don't get why it's a big story, to be honest with you.
Okay, I would concur. Matt, have you noticed a lot of stuff about American Sniper? And I know Chris Calton's just chomping at the bit right now. We'll definitely get to you, and it's going to be awesome. But I want to know Matt's perspective and what you've seen, like what you've heard, through the airwaves here.
I don't know, it seems that anytime Corey and I will make a post or a comment on it, people kind of take any support of the movie with being synonymous with supporting the war on terror and every American military decision ever, when they're clearly not synonymous in any way. Eastwood even said recently, there's a piece on Rare about it, that the movie was intended to be an anti-war film, and as Mike said, it just shows a lot of downsides of war. It kind of shows how he missed out on his child's upbringing because he was always overseas fighting. It shows the effect that PTSD had on him. I didn't interpret it to be a pro-war movie in any way, so that was kind of my take on it.
Okay. Now, Chris, what's your major contention with American Sniper, if you have one? I saw your post, it was generally ambiguous, but I know you have something to say about it.
Well, it was ambiguous because I think the movie was a bit of a mixed bag. The PTSD stuff showing the horrors of wars and the effects that it has on our troops, I think is an important anti-war statement. And in fact, it was readings on stuff to do with PTSD and troop training that first started turning me against, kind of towards the anarchist view on war back when I was still a statist like the three of you. But I think that there's also still some of that pro-patriot, rah, 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 and that was the most fictionalized part of the movie. The PTSD stuff was relatively accurate, but look at the opening scene of the movie. It's where Chris Kyle is put in a situation where he has to assassinate a child who was just given a grenade by his Muslim mother to go and sacrifice himself. That scene was completely made up. That wasn't in the biography. It didn't happen. But what it does is it takes the victim of the movie from being the civilians over here in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it takes it where those aren't the victims, they're the savages, just like these Republican, patriots want to believe, and the victim is poor Chris Kyle's little conscience, when in his own biography, he didn't really seem to show any remorse. So that part is fictionalized, and that's where this stuff is coming from, and I think that has to be talked about.
Okay, now, that's a good point, but I just want to give our viewers a baseline of where you're at. Do you think any war is ever justified, ever, in the history of mankind? By a nation state?
You cut out, I think, right at the important part of that. Can you repeat the question?
Do you think war by a nation state is ever at all justifiable? Are there just wars? Are there necessary wars? Or is all war bad, period?
Only defensive wars. So there's all war is bad, period, because there is always an aggressive side. There's somebody that's attacking or invading somebody else. But I think that it's justifiable to take a defensive stance. Look at I believe the Barbary Wars in America would be an acceptable answer, as well as, of course, the Revolutionary War.
Why the Barbary Wars? They weren't affecting the homeland.
The Barbary Wars were affecting Americans, United States citizens, and Thomas Jefferson, in line with the Constitution, did nothing more than send out a Navy landing troop and then went to Congress to ask for permission to send more.
But there was never a declaration of war for either of those, not for the first or the second. Madison never got a declaration, Thomas Jefferson never did.
Which is why Thomas Jefferson only sent a naval force, which is entirely in line with the Constitution.
What do you mean a naval force? That's the military.
No, it was completely separate in the Constitution, and this is my area of expertise. The Constitution allows...
This is my area of expertise.
Absolutely. The Constitution allows for the maintenance of a standing Navy, but it does not allow for the maintenance of a standing Army. That's explicit in the Constitution.
Yes, no, it's a commander-in-chief, meaning that there is an army. Yes, there's a standing army in the Constitution.
That's explicitly incorrect.
Well, anyway.
Well, can I interrupt?
All right, we'll
who's the president?
Another day, but you are wrong on that. That is explicitly wrong.
So they have rules for a draft. Where does the military come from?
Constitutionally, originally, prior to the Civil War, the states actually raised militias, and then Congress would have to pass an act that would draft from the state militias only, and that changed when the National Guard was created that actually centralized the military. So before then, all you could have was the naval forces and the Marines, which were part of the Department of the Navy. This isn't even contested among Republican constitutions.
No, it's very contested. Yes, there can be a standing army. Yeah, we have one, and it's constitutional.
No,
but anyway.
No, it's.
Hey, Will, can I?
I know, I hate you so much. But anyway,
if you repeat it often enough, it just becomes convincing, right? That's what you're doing.
I just said I hate you. Anyway, Mike, go ahead.
I mean, before we beat the subject to a dead horse and move on to something else, I just want to say in regards to Chris's point, I mean, Hollywood takes creative liberty with a lot of stories, and they did that here. And I remember reading an article before this movie came out, and one of the things that they really wanted to do, and I think the Kyle family was on board with that. And let me say something too. I don't think Kyle's a hero. I think that he's a mixed bag, but the Kyle family's on board with this too. They wanted to represent what soldiers go through in general, not just what Chris Kyle went through. And I think that when we talk about the opening scene where he has to, when there's the kid and the mother, now that's not in Chris's autobiography, but that is a situation that troops in our military have gone through a lot, and a lot of people have struggled with that exact kind of same situation. It's haunted a lot of people for a long time. I know people that have gone through that kind of situation. So I don't think it's necessarily, I mean, you can say, okay, Chris Kyle might not have. Maybe he did go through a similar situation, and maybe it didn't haunt him. But part of the reason that they put that scene in is because that is something a lot of people have gone through, and that's part of what is wrong with the war on terrorism right now. That's part of the reality that people don't want to see. And unfortunately, that's some of the kind of things that have unfolded.
All right. Good point. I kind of want to move on to a broader issue where we're all probably going to agree, but Chris will find something where he won't agree with us on. But kind of like this caricature that we see everywhere. If you watch any talking head, any pundit, they frame capitalism as corporatism. I mean, I think a lot of people, certainly in the mainstream media, in academia, the intelligentsia, everywhere you go, cannot separate the two. What do you think are some of like the biggest myths of capitalism that you see on a daily basis, insofar as that amalgam of corporatism and capitalism? What do you think, Matt? Like, what do you think are the major areas where people get these things conflated?
I'm actually awaiting a piece right now on publication. It's going to be titled 5 Reasons Progressives Should Support Economic Freedom. So I actually just kind of look at like 5 different caricatures of capitalism and try to show how the reverse is true. So like, the rich get rich and the poor get poorer, or that it kind of like that capitalism facilitates discrimination against certain groups. I just talk about claims like that and try to go through them and show why they're not true.
I mean, so you hit on a pretty good point there. I think one of them is the fixed pie. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. I think that's probably everything else comes under the penumbra of the fixed pie.
Yeah,
that there's wealth and. Go ahead.
Yeah, Larry Summers actually, I don't know, there's a piece of his, and he was trying to estimate like how rich the average person would be if inequality was the same today as it was in the 1970s. And, I mean, the big assumption that he's making is that the economy would have grown at the same speed in the past 30 years if inequality was the same rate. But there's a lot of research that actually shows that economies with more inequality actually tend to grow faster. So it's kind of like an apples to oranges comparison, and I was kind of going through. I actually wrote another piece going through the math on why he's wrong about that.
Okay, and where can people find that piece?
It's not published yet, but it'll be coming out soon.
Okay, and you'll put it on BCL when it's out. I would put it on Being Liberal Logic because it's just going way better right now. All right, I'm just busting your chops, Chris. I want to get your view on this. I know you're going to have a very vivid, visceral, and incisive opinion here on what do you think people conflate the most. You know as well as I do, people are conflating capitalism and corporatism. Where do you think is the biggest part where they overlap, that people get this caricature that is entirely untrue?
It's hard to pinpoint a single thing. I've actually been thinking about that since you asked. As the Austrian in me, I always go, well, the banks obviously are the biggest examples of an amalgamation between business and private business and the government, because you always have banks and government kind of colluding with each other. I don't know if that's where people in general get the impression is. I think it's just any characterized CEO from a large company, where it's not always a fair representation, even where you have a combination. I like to use Microsoft as an example. Prior to the antitrust lawsuit in '99, Microsoft really was an independent company. They didn't lobby in Washington, D.C. or anything like that. And when they were actually sued by the federal government for supposedly being a monopoly, and the government, to benefit all us helpless consumers, forced them to sell Microsoft Office separately rather than giving it away for free, which they were doing. Thank you for that, government. And now Microsoft actually has a lobbyist in DC, and they actually have a building right in the middle of DC that they fund to try and sway legislation their way. And so now it gets, well, look at Microsoft lobbying for government favors and government handouts when they've kind of been forced into it. And so you see this from just about any large corporation, because once you get to a certain size, you can't help it.
Let me interject, though. Do you just see that on the sides, on the side of output, or do you see the same happening with inputs, such as unions? Are they similar to corporations? Are they lobbying too, or are they at the mercy of corporations and government?
Well, unions are a unique situation. Obviously, I don't oppose somebody coming together voluntarily and collectively bargaining, because I'm an anarchist. You do what you want as long as you're not pushing that on me. But unions actually don't even have to produce anything. And so when the government's funding them, they're getting subsidized by the government to literally produce nothing other than help get people elected. So they're obviously guilty of it in a very similar sense, except at least Microsoft is still producing some crappy product or other.
Right. Also, unions are also limiting the labor market. I mean, their increased wages, their increased wages doesn't come at the behest of increased productivity. It comes at the behest of limiting the marketplace, other people that can't get a job.
Right.
And I think government helps with that.
There's only two professions that can survive without actually producing anything in the economy, and that's union bosses and politicians.
That's very true. I would agree with you there. Michael, moving along, what do you think, now, not moving along necessarily, but what do you think is, the caricature of capitalism, meshed with corporatism? Where do you feel is like the biggest problem, the biggest misconception?
I think you guys hit on it for the most part. I think the main thing is and it's not just corporations, it's unions too. And I find it ironic, I think you hit on it a little bit, that people that are liberals and people that are a little more maybe on the lower income spectrum tend to support unions even if they're not unionized, even though those are the people that unions harm the most because it keeps them out of the job market. But unions do the same thing as corporations do. They lobby government for regulations, and they lobby government for regulations that are in their favor. I'll give a perfect example of that. A couple days ago, BlackBerry. Does anybody even remember what BlackBerry is anymore? They actually are trying to lobby the government so that app companies, if they make an app for Apple and Android, they have to make an app for BlackBerry as well. They're calling it app neutrality, whatever that means. So they're trying to lobby government so that obviously, developers have to make a app for BlackBerry, and they're hoping that their market share rises. Now, if prices rise for apps because of that, and people can't afford applications, people will blame capitalism. They'll say it's a market failure, but it wasn't a market failure. It was a government interfering in the market failure, and I think that's how the issue gets conflated so often, is because people interfere with the market, but we still have a market economy, so who are we going to blame? We're not a socialist country, so it must be capitalism's fault.
That's exactly right, and you nailed it. I think a lot of these things, you have these political incentives that are entirely different from economic incentives. Politicians are out there, they're interjecting into economic arrangements between two people where they have no business interjecting, and then when things fall apart, much like the Great Recession in 2008, they blame the market. You know what I mean? That had nothing to do with the market and everything to do with self-aggrandizing politicians. So you kind of nailed it. The show is called Beer and Bastards. We should probably, show everybody what beer we're drinking. Michael is in Europe, so he probably has one of those foo-foo Belgian, I drink my beer out of a wine glass beers. What are you drinking, Mike?
I mean, you can call it foo-foo. I'm drinking it out of a wine glass, but I'm drinking a St. Folian Triple tonight. This has probably about 4 times the alcohol as the beer that you're drinking in it. So maybe I'm drinking it out of a wine glass, but it's still pretty good.
Oh, yeah, I think actually the gals and bitches in bourbon drink that. Maddie, what do you have?
I'm being mocked in chat for drinking Miller High Life, but before that I was drinking St. Adams.
It's a champagne of beers.
I bought a 30 of it like 2 months ago, and I'm just trying to get through it. So
All right, there you go. You don't want to waste money.
Exactly.
Economics.
I only get
Chris, what?
books. I can't afford much.
Chris, what beers are you drinking? What varietal? That's for wine, but whatever. I'm drunk.
I'm drinking low carbohydrate Gatorade because I actually like to take care of my body, and I'm losing weight right now because I want to show out my muscles a little better. I'm still stronger than you, so I got a long way to go till I'm as weak and fat as you are, Will, and when I get there, I'll drink beer.
That's good. You need it. I'm drinking Bud Light, which is the king of beers, and because America.
So.
Yeah, and America has borders, like real borders, that people can't cross without following laws.
Probably overregulated.
Will was telling me that he was going to be drinking B-. I didn't even know what B- was until Will told me what B- was.
Yeah.
What is that? Where is he from?
Go to your local. Look, Mike, you've been in Europe too long. You're out of touch. Go to your local bartender and ask for a B-, and this is what you'll get. Okay?
No one in Michigan is going to know what B- is, man. No one's going to know what that is.
European pansies over there. All right, so moving along here. Next issue. I saw a lot of things on everybody's pages this week on school choice. One of the admins on my page was talking about, he had an argument for public schools. I'm entirely against public schools. I think that the market can handle schooling. And school choice is a measure to get there, a mitigative step against public schooling. What do you think, Matt? What do you think's better? Do you think, I don't know if I want to make it that broad, but do you think school choice is a good idea, and why?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's really a case where competition has ever made something less efficient or less productive. So yeah, obviously. I know there's models.
Go ahead.
I know vouchers would pretty much keep the public school system in place, but at least allow competition between public schools. I mean, it might not be the most desirable ideologically from where we come from, but I think politically it would probably have the highest chance of becoming a reality.
You don't think? I'm sorry. Say that again. You don't think that private schools have a chance, like privatizing schools?
Not a 100% private model. I don't know.
It's entirely politically infeasible. Yes.
That's my point. Yeah. I mean, ideologically, I know you don't like that, but I think politically, I don't think that would ever happen. So.
But you see vouchers or school choice as an ameliorative step in that direction.
Yeah, I think vouchers would be the best. I mean, that's kind of what I defend. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Michael, what's your opinion on that?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of us. I don't know about Chris. I don't really know Chris. He's a guy, but I think a lot of us are on the same page with that. It's kind of funny. It's a coincidence. My high school actually died because of school choice. My high school is a poor performing high school, and when school choice came along in Michigan, people fled the area to other local schools, and my school ended up dying. So I have a reason to hate school choice if I was biased, but I think it's good. I think we all agree that public schools are underperforming and they're not really ideal. But in the political climate, it's hard to get government out of schools. I wish we could get government out of schools because competition works in schools and privatization works. So I don't know why it wouldn't be. The data shows right now private schools are better than public schools. So I don't know why private schools wouldn't perform better if public schools weren't around. But since it's hard to get the government out of education, vouchers work well, school of choice works well. In school of choice, I think one thing people miss, and I believe Corey brought this up on Being Classically Liberal, is school of choice helps public schools too. Because when public schools have to compete, when they don't have a monopoly anymore, all of a sudden public schools, they start to improve too. Because they know they have to compete.
Well, Mike, it may help public. It depends on whose perspective you're looking at. If you're looking at it through the union perspective.
Yeah, if you're at a public, if you're a union boss and you're at a public school that's threatened, yeah, it doesn't help your school at all. But in general, it does help public schools because public schools now they know they have to compete. They can't just draw every student in their district and call it good. It doesn't work that way anymore. And in that sense, if we can't get government out of education, I think that's a good thing.
I mean, the unions are so strong. They run public education. That's why it's so poor. Chris, would you agree with me that we don't need government in the school systems? I mean, to a certain degree.
Well,
I'm not saying that it has to be removed entirely. But do you think the market can handle it better?
I may be an anarchist, but obviously I believe we need government in school. I mean, that's just a given. It's our children, right? Now, I mean,
The children, the kids, for the kids.
Government can get out of school. What's the stupid question is that? I think government can get out of everything. I'm a pragmatist. I agree with Matt. I think vouchers are better than our current system, and no government intervention would be better than that. I think it can be entirely privatized. Share a little interesting statistic with you. Massachusetts today is the #1 ranked state for public education. 1850, Massachusetts was the first state to pass compulsory attendance laws. And Massachusetts in 1850 had a higher rate of adult literacy than it does today with our highest ranked schools in education. So yeah, obviously the private market can take care of education, and we can save $9,000 a kid on average every year by doing so. Let's get rid of government.
I'm a little fuzzy on the statistics, but I'm pretty sure before we had compulsory schooling laws, we had the same literacy rate almost that we have today. That there was people were going to school anyway. You know what I mean? So I don't know.
Yeah. Overall,
yes. And Friedman makes that argument in Free to Choose. He makes a great argument in there. All right, let's move on to our next topic. Obamacare. Everybody's thrilled about Obamacare. It's economically sound. You know what I mean? It's all about the people. It's compassionate. Without it, people would be dying in the streets. So clearly it's a necessity. Matt, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I actually like my plan and I got to keep it, so I completely agree with everything you said.
Yeah, you liked your plan and you got to keep it?
Yes, sir. Yeah, so I'm all good with it.
Wow, so you're one of the few
He's
that
only
actually
13
kept
years
both.
old. He's on his parents' plan.
That's true.
So you mean your mom got to keep her plan?
No, but I mean, what Obamacare does is it tries to attack the problem of the uninsured, but not the problem of basically why we have so many uninsured people, and that's because the cost is too damn high. I think really, if you want healthcare,
right,
to attack costs, not really the symptom of the problem.
And you would probably know this. What's the culprit of these, large? I mean, some people say they're large healthcare costs. Some of them may be. What's the culprit of these high costs? Was it really ever a free market? Was it a free market before Obamacare, or was there a certain level of dirigisme seeping in before?
Before we had like the employer-sponsored model we had today, a lot of people were part of fraternal societies, so they each pitch in kind of like basically a pool of insurance. Not like it's kind of hard to explain, but it's more communal than it was today. But no, I'm trying to think of like how I could organize it. I think you probably remember in my book, I was talking about a bunch of different reasons why costs are so high. I guess probably the biggest is that there's no price system right now. So no one actually knows or cares what things cost because insurance is bailing them out. So it kind of tends to inflate prices upward. And then there are other reasons. It's a very heavily regulated sector. I mean, Google will invest in driverless cars, which are banned in certain states, but they won't invest in healthcare technology because it's too regulated, which I think tells you a lot. And I know that's kind of two big reasons, I think.
Okay. Michael, I know you were telling me about how great Obamacare is, even though you're in Europe. I think they probably have universal health care where you are, and it's probably excellent. People from there probably didn't come to the United States pre-Obamacare to get superior health care. But tell me what you think are the biggest problems with it. And certainly, we talked a little bit about the statistics today. What do you think are the biggest problems? Is it costs? What do you think?
Here's what I think about the biggest problem with the insurance debate is we can't separate healthcare from insurance for some reason. Healthcare and insurance are two different things. When I explain this to people, right, I like to say, okay, think about your car. You get auto insurance, right? You get auto insurance in case something catastrophic happens. You get an accident, you get rear-ended. You don't get auto insurance so you can get your tires rotated, or that you can get an
oil change,
a routine oil change. You don't get insurance for that. Which you get insurance for the bad stuff. if you got to go to the doctor's office because you got the flu, if we didn't have this kind of insurance scheme set up, and the Europeans are more guilty than this of us, and we're going down that track, then costs would be down because doctors' offices would have to, that whole thing, compete. But with the insurance schemes that we have,
Right.
they don't have to compete. They're going to get paid. If you want to drive costs down, you have to open up competition. And I think the main thing that we have to separate in the debate is we have to separate health care from health insurance. Health insurance doesn't equal health care. And I think that's got conflated in this whole debate.
I think you're absolutely right. I know that I pay cash when I go to the doctor, and doctors do compete for cash patients because they don't have to have all the red tape of insurance companies. So when I pay a doctor for a checkup $60, they're stoked about that $60. That's $60 cash. Yep, exactly. And I'll call around, and that's what I do. That's competition. I think you're entirely right. People can't separate those two things. Chris, I know you have an opinion on this. It's probably going to piss somebody off. What do you think?
No, I think most of you guys will like my input on healthcare as well. I like the history of everything, so I'll go back to that. If you look pre-World War II, health insurance really didn't exist except for emergencies. It was almost identical to life insurance, and it cost like $1 a month or something stupid. I mean, it's very, very affordable, and pretty much everybody carried it. It was just part of the culture. And it was only because the government stepped in and beneficially limited wages so that evil companies couldn't pay higher wages, that health insurance even got started. Then Lyndon B. Johnson comes in the 60s and starts instituting Medicare and Medicaid, and all this essentially does is take services that doctors were giving away for free as literally an act of charity, and it redistributed money from middle-class taxpayers to middle-class doctors. And since then, it's only spiraled up to where we had more and more socialized medicine, and as a result, now it's 2015. I'll give you myself as an example. I just bought health insurance on the private market, not through Obamacare.gov or whatever it is. But I am 28 years old. I do not smoke. I do not do drugs. I don't drink. I work out 5 days a week, and I've literally never been hospitalized.
Let me interject. Are you sure you don't do drugs?
Honest to God, I'm just really this retarded. So I am about, on paper, as cheap as it should be to insure somebody. Like, I'm very, very healthy. It would cost me, without government subsidies, $250 for a basic health insurance plan with $50 deductibles. Now, I am covered, to be fair, if I get pregnant, and my non-existent children are covered for basic care, so at least there is that.
So just in case you get prego, you're covered.
Yeah, but that's not going to happen because I never have sex with anybody.
Right, nobody wants to have sex with you. I got it.
I mean, except for you.
Now that makes a lot of sense. I think that's that's probably the thing that made the most amount of sense that you've said so far.
Is this a good time to announce our love for each other physically, Will?
Calton and I went out to lunch one time. He forcibly, by violating the NAP, made me pay for his lunch at Red Lobster. And things got really weird. He tried to play footsies. I declined. And then I don't want to tell you what happened after that because the cops will get involved, and we don't really need that.
I was there, too, but I can't speak about the incident either.
Yeah, I don't want anyone to... Really, it's kind of like I'm starting... My eyes are welling up here a little bit, and I'm going to cry, and we don't need that on the show. I'm sorry?
It kind of triggers me to think about it, so I'm not even going to.
All right, here's an issue that comes up a lot. Not necessarily one issue, but what bothers you, Chris? I mean, we may have anarchist viewers because they're everywhere. What bothers you most about anybody that says that the state does have a role? Like, do you think they're stupid? That they've somehow been brainwashed? What do you think it is?
It doesn't bother me. I mean, I've still got a video on YouTube that I made about anarchy, talking about how I'm not an anarchist, I'm a constitutionalist. So I always remind everybody that is in the anarchist community, none of us were born thinking this way. So I think it's stupid to jump on and say, well, you're stupid if you think that way. No, you're not. Except for you, Will. You are stupid.
Okay.
But I always remind people, I say, okay, hypothetically, just speaking morally, philosophically, if things can be done through voluntary action, Would that be better, yes or no? And most people are going to say, well, hypothetically, if it could be done, yes. And once you establish that philosophically speaking it would be better, then we can start getting in the more difficult but the more practical debates, such as what we were talking about earlier with, military or police or the court system, usually the big three that people throw at you, or even things like contract law and, of course, roads. How would we get roads without government? So it's always a process, I think, when you have that conversation with anybody, but it's a healthy conversation to have.
Right. Okay. All right. Now let's talk to the three statists on our panel here. Clearly, we're statists, from the opinion of Chris Calton and his cohorts. Mike, as a statist, what do you feel are the largest areas of contentions between you, like you as a libertarian, and then you have your anarcho-capitalists who call themselves libertarian, but I don't think it's very libertarian. But I'll get to Chris on that later. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that as a group we've talked about this before, that I don't really like the whole labels as libertarian. I never really knew I was a libertarian until I started kind of watching Ron Paul, and they said, well, I'm a libertarian. But I don't like for one, I don't like those labels, but I think a lot of the disconnect between maybe people that don't think there should be any government and people that think there should be minimal government, maybe like me and conservatives and liberals, is, I think is what we think is feasible. I think Chris will tell you that, just because we don't see any evidence for some of his ideas, that's because, his ideas haven't been tried. And if they were tried, that he thinks that they would succeed. And I think that, there's ideas that are revolutionary, but I think the disconnect is between at least limited government people and no government people is no government people are trying to tell me that their ideas just haven't been tried yet, whereas I'm trying to tell you I'm following the evidence. And I think that's the only disconnect we have, because I have a lot of sympathetic views towards their arguments, but I can't agree completely.
I see. What about you, Maddie? What do you think? What are those areas of contention that perturb you?
It was between us and like ANCAPs was the question.
Yeah, anarchists in general.
I think it's more methodology than even policy. Mainly our approach to things is a lot different. Like, we may acknowledge that there's if we're trying to transition from something where something's government controlled to completely privatized, we kind of acknowledge that there might be a step needed where it's partially private, partially public, and we'll kind of be more likely to embrace that as a transitionary, kind of like to transition from one to another. I feel like they're more absolutist, but that's kind of my.
So you're like gradualism versus non-gradualism.
Yeah, I guess that's how you could put it. I didn't know that was a term, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a great correspondence between Walter Block and Milton Friedman. You can Google it, but they're debating this, and obviously Milton Friedman wins, Uncle Milt. But I mean, it was really a great debate. Now I want to get to Chris. I was talking about libertarianism. When did anarcho-capitalism fall under the umbrella of libertarianism?
Actually,
it doesn't seem.
Well, I'll go back farther.
Go ahead.
This is more. It actually has more to do with anarchist history than libertarian history. The question isn't when did anarchism fall under libertarianism. It's when did capitalism fall under the umbrella of either libertarianism or anarchism. The term libertarian was coined, contrary to both of our beliefs, to describe essentially communist anarchism from the 19th century anarchists, which were largely different divisions of socialists. And it was a communist who coined the term. It wasn't till around the mid-20th century in the United States that liberty-minded people were looking for something to describe their more radical beliefs that they started coining the term libertarianism. And the anarcho-capitalism came about in the 1940s. So they've always been related in this country, but if we really want to go on the epistemology of the word, then neither of us have a right to it. So I don't really like getting caught up into that. I think anarchism is just a more specific branch of libertarianism, and I'm going to leave it at that.
Hey, Will, can I ask Chris a question?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to ask Chris what he thinks, because I've gotten into these situations before. If I told Chris that I was a minarchist, what would Chris say to that?
I would say okay, I guess. I mean, like, I don't have an issue with you being a minarchist. I wouldn't start saying, oh, you're a statist, like, what's wrong with you, you minarchist? Like, I'm not one of those types, if that's what you're wondering.
Would you say that I only... Would you say that I only like to get raped a little bit, or...
Usually I only say that to you, Will.
But you would know, because, never mind, I don't want to talk about that night.
All right. Pretty much every anarcho-capitalist was a minarchist first.
Yes. I would agree with that.
Pretty much every homosexual was bi first, but...
Yeah, that's true. I like the, that was vivid. All right, now let's move on to, I want to get into a little bit of terrorism, and I certainly want to get into it with Chris Calton, because he talked about the Barbary Wars earlier. And terrorism affects American citizens. It's a threat to American citizens. They've beheaded American citizens in the Middle East. Do you think there's any appropriate response, from an anarchist view, that the United States of America could take against, say, ISIS? Let's look at that specifically. What do you think?
It's always a tough question. I actually don't even look in the term. I think about it in terms of North Korea, because that's like my pet obsession country. Like, I read a lot about North Korea, and I feel a lot for those people. And I always think to myself, if we could, theoretically, if we could go into these places and take out these despots and these tyrants and these terrorists, if you want to use the term, if we can take them out and help the people and make them better off, is that justifiable? And it's a question that I never really have a concrete answer to, because part of me says yes, of course, and part of me says no, it's still not our business. But when I take the hypothetical out of it and I look in the practical, the answer is always no. Because historically, there's very few exceptions of us intervening somewhere and actually coming out better off. Korea probably being possibly the only answer, because at least the South Koreans are better off for not being a part of North Korea. But Vietnam's not better off for our intervention. Even in World War II, it was really the Soviets that did more to defeat the Nazis than we did. Though, I mean, you can at least make an argument that we contributed. World War I, it was our intervention that led to the problems in Germany that led to Hitler. So you see, time and time again, we're usually making stuff worse. Even before, and this goes back to Michael Lee, I think, if you're a minarchist, before I was an anarchist, but when I was really struggling with my foreign policy views, which really are the toughest, I read Smedley Butler's book, War is a Racket. And if you cross out the word capitalism and change it to corporatism, it's a really solid book through and through. And he makes a very good case for a defensive military. And although I think even that's farther than we need to go, I think it's a really good argument from the pro-military, minarchist, small government conservative perspective that says we're not doing anything good by intervening and we need to be defensive.
Okay, you say when you say the word intervening, do you mean intervening somewhere where we have there's no American stake, no American interest? Like nation building? Or are you saying intervening insofar as, let's say, Japan declares war on us, and perhaps they can't, I don't know, let's say it's pre-World War I, pre-airplanes, they can't reach here, yet we know that Japan has declared war on us, and we say, perhaps we should do something about it. Do you think we should leave it alone? Like, where do you stand on, American interests? I don't really care much about the political structure in the Middle East. I just care about American interests. If we have to defeat ISIS and that's good for American interests, then we do it, and we win the war.
So, what Smedley Butler, and by the way, for those who don't know who he was actually a general for the Marines in the early 20th century, and he's the only guy to ever win 2 Medals of Honor, and he survived all of his tours. And he came out after being a Medal of Honor, twice winning Marine general, to be very, very anti-intervention. And what he meant by it was any time we are taking our troops and our technology outside of American borders. And what he advocated was having the Navy and the Air Force essentially patrolling around the coast of the United States and taking a very strong defensive position. Now, obviously, I don't entirely agree with this, but it was one of the steps in me rethinking my foreign policy. So yeah, I don't think we need to go into those countries. I don't think we need to bomb those countries. If Japan declares war on us, I think putting up a very strong defense in our homeland is enough to combat that. And frankly, I think if we did that, if we were truly defensive, people would be less inclined to declare war on us anyway.
Okay, Michael, what's your opinion? I know we talked about this last show, a little bit about foreign policy, but nobody saw that show, and they probably shouldn't because it was god awful. But where do you stand? I think you're somewhere. A little bit. You're a little bit more pragmatic than Calton, although he made a good case. Don't tell him I said that. Go ahead, Mike.
Here's the thing. I agree with Chris on a lot of the things that he said. I think a lot of our interventions in the Middle East, and I came around to foreign policy. That's how I came around to the philosophy I had, is because of some of our interventions in the Middle East. I don't agree with those. But my problem is, and a lot of my problem with the libertarian philosophy is today, is people that don't think that the U.S. military has a role in the world. Now, here's the problem. Unfortunately for us, we happen to be the most powerful country in the world. And you can debate whether that's good for us or not, but the fact of the matter is, it's true. I kind of wish, the Germans or the French were more powerful than us, because then they could do the heavy lifting, and that's terrible beer, but they could do the heavy lifting, and then we wouldn't have to do so. But here's the thing. The fact of the matter is, we are the global superpower, and actually, in my opinion, that's unfortunate. Now, when it comes to the Middle East, I don't want us to get involved. But when it comes to international politics, the Europeans are our allies, the Australians are our allies. If we have to have a strategy that says we need to focus on Asia because we're worried about the Chinese having influence over Japan and Australia, then we have to send our Navy, and we have to have a strategy in Australia. We have to flex our military muscle. We have to let the Russians know. We have to send our advisors to Poland. We have to let the Russians know that we're going to stand by the Europeans. They have to know that we're there. Otherwise, the Russians are going to do what they want in Europe. I think about it this way. Think about the Cold War. You think that, non-interventionist foreign policy, it works. But if we had that foreign policy during the Cold War, the Russians would have had all the influence over Europe. All of it. We wouldn't have had any influence over Europe. So all these Western democracies that are thriving in Europe right now, and they're trying to go the way of the Soviet Union 50 years ago, but, at least right now they're thriving. Those probably wouldn't be around if it wasn't for us. So I understand when people say, hey, it's not good for us to be the superpower. Unfortunately, we are. So the Middle East, some of the interventions that we've got ourselves tangled up in, no, I don't agree with those at all. But to say that we can't be involved in the world and we can't show the world we have the most powerful military, no, we have to tell them. We have to let them know you can't mess with these Western democracies.
Okay, that's a good point. Now, I want to go back to a question I asked before on the last show that nobody watched. I think it's interesting. And I want to start with Chris, and I'll go to Matt, and then I'll go to Mike. What do you think is the biggest problem, let's say, in America today? Do you believe it's political ignorance of, let's say, constitutional law, or their natural rights, or their constitutional rights, or do you think it's just absolute economic ignorance? What do you think is most prevalent, and what do you think is the bigger problem? I don't want to say ignorance. I think it's more apathy. I don't think people are ignorant. They're just apathetic. What do you think, Chris?
I think it's pretty easy to. That's a tough question, for one thing. I think it's pretty easy to say ignorance in general, political, economic, constitutional ignorance of things that I can usually, for the most part, get behind, like the Bill of Rights. We're all pretty economically interested, so I think we're likely to be biased to saying economic ignorance. But I'm going to go a different direction and say I think it's centralization. Centralization is contrary even to the constitutional viewpoint that wanted rights in the hands of the states, the cities, and the individual, and we've moved away from that. Even the statist Will would agree with that, I think. And centralization is a problem where it's not so much that ignorance is the problem, that you can't know enough for a group of 320 million people to make decisions in the voting booth that are going to come. Like, I don't know enough. If there were 320 million of me, I wouldn't know how to vote the right way to do that, to put the hands in 536 individuals out of 320 million. So I would go with centralization.
Well, I see that as a political problem. Again, just ignorance of constitutional law, certainly the 10th Amendment, and most definitely of jurisprudence. That would be my opinion on that. I just don't think people know legitimate powers of the three branches of the federal government and how they're supposed to be diffused between the 50 states. That's obviously one of the biggest problems we have, which happened with the Fabian Socialist movement 100 years ago. They've done a great job. The left has done an excellent job imposing their vision on the United States of America, and I think it's largely political. And property rights, they've denuded property rights, and those are the cornerstone of any economic structure. But let me go to Mike. And what do you think, Mike?
Well, I think Chris brought up a great point, actually. I think centralization is a huge problem, and I probably wouldn't have even said that if he didn't say it, because he brought up another great point. We're all pretty engaged in the economic debate, and I think that he realized that maybe all of us would say that, but he's right. Centralization is a huge problem. Centralization of power tends to lead to bad outcomes. Another thing that I think that people don't realize that might be a huge problem is not just the ignorance factor. I think it's something that causes the ignorance, and that's the echo chambers that we have to deal with. And I think I deal with this more than anybody because my page is centralized around being liberal, which is a giant echo chamber. But so is Fox News, so is the Tea Party News, and so are these other places. When you don't have any sort of opposing viewpoints, when all you do is filter in the news from people like, when you have Matthew Desmond from Being Liberal telling you, hey, this is how it is, well, if that's the only news you get, you're going to believe that's how it is. And when someone brings evidence to the table, you're going to believe they're a racist. Or in the case of a conservative that only watches Fox News, when they bring up evidence to the table, well, you're just going to say they're just a liberal that hates America. And when you have these echo chambers, you're unwilling to consider evidence. It's all about ideology at that point. It's no longer about evidence. And I think that's a huge threat, is no one considers evidence anymore.
Right. I agree, but I just want to say for the record that Fox News is a shill for the Republican establishment. Okay, it's like John Boehner's puppy dog. Okay, good news station, you get some decent news out of it, but it's totally establishment GOP. It is by no means conservative.
Can I say
Matt,
that I am not a Bill O'Reilly fan, but I am waiting for him to publish the book Killing Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah, that is going to be a great... that one I might think about buying, actually. That guy is a tool.
It's not a violation of the
Who isn't a tool?
Right?
No, that's definitely not a violation of the nappers.
The question, Will?
Maddie, what do you think?
What was the problem? It was what
do you think
versus political?
Yeah, versus political or apathy or ignorance or whatever you want to call it. I mean, and I mean, what Chris Calton said relating to the centralization of power, that's kind of what I meant. I mean, both of those things have led to central planning in some regards and the centralization of political power. If you look at Calton knows the 17th Amendment. I mean, it basically got rid of the whole purpose of the Senate,
right.
And now we have two houses of the House of Representatives.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's consolidation and things. And then you have Congress delegating lawmaking authorities to the executive branch and the administrative state. More consolidation. So, what do you think it is, Matt? Do you think it's just economic issues, meaning that they're willing to give up more of their property rights to government? So government can take away the property rights of others, or do you think it's, mostly a political apathy, that they just don't really care about the rule of law, and politicians can just get away with this through rhetoric and demagoguery?
I think I'd argue it's more of an economic thing, because you can always argue, when politicians generally argue bad economics, they make it sound like it's good for everyone. When a politician abuses his political power, generally it's reported on negatively. But, if a politician wants to raise minimum wage, it gets reported on positively. So I think you could argue it's much more easier to manipulate people through economic ignorance than political ignorance.
Okay.
Yeah, that's cool. My argument.
Pretty good. I have
seconds ago.
All right, moving along. We have 5 minutes left. I just want to ask you guys, what got you into? I'll start with Mike. I'll go to Chris, and I'll go with Matt. What got you into economics and politics? Like I just mentioned, a lot of people are apathetic. They don't really think about economics on a day-to-day basis. They don't really care. I think a lot more people are more free market than anyone cares to admit. It's just that they don't advocate and they don't say anything. What do you think, Mike?
What brought me to the philosophy, when you grow up, you hear about the Republican versus Democrat debate. That's all you hear about. Apparently, there's only two teams, and you have to cheer for one of those teams. So when I was younger, I cheered for the Republicans. I thought that they made the most sense. And then I joined the Army, and I realized, I was like, okay, well, actually, I don't really agree with the Republican foreign policy. So let me rethink my political position. And then when I rethought my foreign policy, then I started considering a lot of the evidence. And that's what brought me to economics the most, was the fact that, when I started questioning everything, foreign policy, civil rights, when I started questioning everything, I realized that economics basically has an effect on anything that we do. Nothing that we do is not tied to economics. So
let me interject quickly. Are you saying that you were getting a lot of liberal viewpoints, and you were being somewhat contrarian, just questioning all these assertions, and then you looked into it yourself?
Well, basically what happened was I can remember being 16 years old and the Bush-Kerry race is going on. And I can remember being someone that wanted Bush to win this election. Now, obviously today I would be embarrassed to hold that opinion, right? But I was one of those people that hold that just shut evidence off the world. And every time a liberal would say something to me, I'd be like, no, you're wrong because I heard Bill O'Reilly or Sean Hannity say this. And I would shut the world out. And I remember being that person. Mm-hmm. And then I joined the Army, and I kind of started questioning the Republican philosophy on foreign policy because it directly affected me personally. And when I started questioning that, it led me down the road to questioning everything. And when we talk about whether economics is important or not, well, I think what I realize is economics affects everything. It impacts everything we do, every decision we make. So that's why I think that when I started studying economics, that's why I put the most emphasis on it.
Like a total Gary Becker take on economics. I totally agree with that, Mike. I would ask you out if I was, well, I'll ask you out anyway. But you're all the way in Europe. Never mind.
You have a nice...
Oh, thank you. So I think it's better than Chris's, but we'll do a viewer poll after to see who has a better beard. I'm pretty sure I'll win.
I hate you, Will, but you have a very nice beard.
God, you're actually...
I was going to say something.
You're almost a good human being. I know. You're a really great person, Chris. I have my fingers crossed under the desk that I'm sitting at. Chris, the same question I directed at Mike. What got you into economics and politics, and then what led you astray as into getting into anarchy?
Okay, so I was in Tallahassee going to college during the Obama-McCain election, and instead of jumping on the Obama bandwagon like I should have done to help me get laid, which I did not do at all in Tallahassee, I decided to be a responsible first-time voter, because this was my first election, and I decided to start reading a lot of political literature. And the first book I read was Neil Bortz's The Fair Tax book, and it opened my eyes to a lot of things, the way taxes affect us, the problems with it. I was actually a fair tax proponent for a really long time. Up until about 2 years ago, I was a big fair tax proponent because of that book. But I read other things too. I read Chris Matthews and James Carville, a lot of pundits. But trying to branch away from punditry, about a year after the election, I picked up Basic Economics, which was by this guy I'd never heard of, named Thomas Sowell, I think. I don't know, some Harvard professor, and it just really kind of opened my eyes to a lot of things. Absolutely the first taste of economics I ever got. So I was naively a Chicago-style economics advocate for a long time as well. And what finally turned me away from
that...
What's that? Anyway.
Oh, no, keep going.
What brought me into the Austrian and the anarchist camp was the historian Tom Woods, who finally made, I think, a plausible, to me at least, plausible argument against certain things that dispute Chicago school economics and good, convincing philosophical arguments for anarchy. So if anybody hasn't heard of Thomas Woods, and I'm sure everybody has, he's definitely somebody to read as well.
Yeah, I think you're better off watching Rachel Maddow than reading Tom Woods, but that's just me.
Harvard.
Tom Woods, he's okay at some things. He got Madison and war powers and Lincoln entirely wrong. We'll get into that another time, Chris. Perhaps you and I will get on a show and we'll wrestle in a kiddie pool full of olive oil in our tighty whities. But that's definitely for another day. We have a minute left. Maddie, go.
Or how did I get into economics?
Yeah. Are you drunk? Probably drunk. But go ahead.
I don't know. I just I think I read I think I was buying a Thomas Sowell book as a present for someone, but I didn't know who he was. I just thought the title of his book looked like something my dad would like. And then I started reading the book and liked it and kept it for myself. And then I just kind of bought everything else he wrote and got into it that way.
Yeah, I saw your library. It's pretty extensive. I'm kind of proud of you, actually.
Thank you.
But anyway, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. Next week's going to be a lot better because Chris isn't going to be here, most likely. Or he might be here. We don't know. But I hope you enjoyed the show. And follow Being Classically Liberal, The Analytical Conservative, and Being Liberal Logic. And just look Chris Calton up and friend him, especially if you're weird and you'll stalk him. That'd be awesome. Thank you.